In the slow unscrolling of ages, when the dust of countless dynasties lay thick upon the marble of forgotten temples, there was a moment, unspecified, unclaimed by any single calendar, when the concept of CHIM first stirred. It was not declared, nor did it erupt in triumphant revelation. Rather, it unfolded like the slow bloom of a night flower, unseen by most, fragrant only to those who dwelt in the deepest libraries, where the air was ever dry and the candles never wholly quenched. Some have named that time the era without measure, when myth pressed its palm against the glass of history, smudging the boundary between the two. And in that smudged and dim hour, the idea emerged that there might exist, coiled beneath all semblances, a silent authority of self, an awareness so complete it could wear the masks of all gods, and still remain unshaken. They say the first to glimpse the contour of this truth was a priest whose name has been lost beneath generations of scrawled corrections and erasures. Some shards of parchment call him the witness in ash. Others, the silent son of Ve. What little persists agrees only on this, that he stood before the heart of Lorcan when it pulsed still with the quiet throb of stolen divinity, and in that red luminescence, he beheld the soul's mirrored corridor. He did not cry out, nor did he collapse in terror as others had, for he saw not annihilation but union. The witness felt himself dissolve, and in that dissolution he recognized the whole. So began the first whisperings of CHIM, not as a power to be taken, but as a recognition of the dream that dreamt itself, an acknowledgement as gentle and vast as the hush before dawn. In the centuries that followed, this account passed from hand to trembling hand, always accompanied by cautionary marginalia. According to heretical glosses penned in Old Mary script, the notion was anathema. To embrace CHIM was to challenge the divinely ordained gradients of being, for in the folding of self into the dream, one risked the fate of those who grasp too firmly the veil, who find themselves unmade in the zero sum of true comprehension. Yet even the Altmere scholars, most devout in their hierarchies, could not wholly smother the allure of that hidden axis. They copied the accounts, smudged and incomplete, into codices bound in dried kelp and inked with Ibn salts. They locked them behind gates of coral lattice, but the words seeped outward nonetheless, as all dangerous knowledge inevitably does. It was in the dim halls of the Pisich endeavour that the myth found its next fertile soil. Some claimed the Pisics themselves had always known of CHIM, though they named it, in other tongues, phrases whose syllables evoked the shimmering of moonlight on restless tide. To them it was not an ambition, but a station, like a star one might chart by but never wholly reach. Records speak of initiates spending decades in contemplation, fasting beside the silent pools of Artaeum, hoping the water's reflection might at last fracture to reveal the true shape of their own intention. Many saw nothing. A few glimpsed a shadow at the heart of all things, a figure without features, crowned in ash and silence. The law that coalesced around CHIM grew thick with contradiction. Some swore it was the secret behind the tribunal's divine ascent, though Vivek himself wrote in verses both exalting and dismissive, as if mocking any who sought to pry meaning from the riddles. Others insisted CHIM was a disease of the mind, a conceptual contagion infecting those who dared ponder the nature of the dreamer. And yet, across the parchments and the whispers, the same imagery returned again and again: the mask that concealed no face, the throne unoccupied, the flame that burned without consuming. Over time, the witness's legend became more symbol than person. His mask, if ever he had truly worn one, was said to linger in the ruins of a temple sunken beneath the iliac waters. Pilgrims, lured by fragments of the tale, would descend into the brine-choked sanctum, seeking some remnant of that first revelation. Most found only collapsed colonnades and statues worn faceless by centuries of current, but a rare few claimed to have touched the mask in dreams, waking with salt crusted in their hair, and a sense that their names had momentarily slipped away. Such stories fueled further pilgrimage, the old cycle repeating: yearning, descent, and the ache of something nearly remembered. Those who dared to record these pilgrimages often noted a singular sensation that followed, an echo that did not fade, a hush that clung to their thoughts like the final tolling of a temple bell. They described it not as enlightenment, but as a gentle wound, an ache that suggested they had glimpsed, however briefly, the infinite interweaving of the self and the dream. And though most returned to their lives, they were never wholly unchanged. For once the question had rooted in the mind, it could not be torn free. So the legend of CHIM drifted through eras like a hidden current, shaping scholars and sovereigns alike in ways no edict or blade ever could. In the autumnal hush of the Third Era, when empires measured their worth in crumbling coinage and silent ruin, the myth took on yet another life. Acolytes of the hidden schools transcribed what they called the Silence Canticles, their words drawn from memory, rumour, and that same inescapable longing. And in the flickering lamplight, they wrote of the witness in ash, who became no one at all, who wore the mask until even the mask had dissolved, and who in that dissolution touched the boundary where all dreams converge. Some would say he perished then, others believed he still wandered, unbound by name, his footsteps a soft stirring wherever seekers gathered in the dark to ask who dreams the dream. And so, through centuries and ruin, the legend waited like a seed hidden beneath ash, awaiting the silent hour when the soul itself would become soil enough for revelation. In a hollow season, when the moons lay swollen upon the black vault of the sky, and the tides of memory ebbed to expose the drowned relics of an older world, another figure emerged from the labyrinth of record and conjecture. This was the chronicler known to some as Meridain the Dusk Scribe, whose vellum scrolls remain, though she herself has long dissolved into rumour. Where the witness in ash had beheld CHIM as a mirror of self in the red heart of a sundered god, Meridain sought to weave the notion into a tapestry of precedent. She wrote in phrases dense as woven flax, her sentences coiling upon themselves in patient spirals, and yet she left gaps, deliberate silences between the words, as if to suggest that no text could wholly circumscribe what she dared to name. According to the chronicles attributed to her hand, the earliest ancestors of the Ennefe, those ancient unshaped beings from whose essences the world was crafted, had known something akin to CHIM, though they named it neither word nor thought. She claimed that the first awareness arose not as an act of dominion, but of recognition, a kind of sacred consent to the unfolding dream. In this telling, the Ennefe did not awaken to seize reality, but to acknowledge their place within it, a gesture at once humble and boundless. Some scholars dismiss this as poetic contrivance. Others, reading by guttering candle, found their pulses quicken at the possibility that CHIM was older than all myth, a hidden inheritance carried in every soul, waiting to be remembered. As Meridain described it, the throat of the world itself became an axis around which these secret recognitions revolved. In the silence between avalanches and dragon-wrought conflagrations, she said, the very stones would whisper to those with ears attuned, "I am, and I know that I am," a fragment of CHIM in the voice of mountain. Whether any heard such confessions is a matter forever beyond proof, but the image clung to her readers, an unshakable impression that in every place of ancient power, some residue of awareness lingered, a quiet testament to the dreamer's reflection. Her writings described pilgrims who climbed to High Hrothgar, not to master the Thu'um or test their frail sinews against the cold, but to listen. For nights unbroken by speech, they knelt among the frost-shrouded cairns, waiting for a silence deeper than the grave to descend. Some returned empty-handed, but a few, their faces hollowed by vigil, claimed they had heard the voice without words, a resonance that seemed to echo from within their own marrow. To these, Meridain assigned no names, for she believed the moment of recognition dissolved all distinctions, all titles. A pilgrim who tasted that silence, she wrote, was no longer wholly of this world, though they might walk among us still, even within the cloistered scriptoria of Somerset. Her scrolls ignited cautious fascination. Among the Altmer, ever vigilant against heresy, copies were made nonetheless, each bearing disclaimers in silver ink that the content was speculative, unverified, and potentially corruptive. And yet scribes continued to copy them, unable to resist the allure of a doctrine that suggested both the fragility and the boundlessness of the self. For if Meridain spoke truth, then CHIM was not a weapon to be wielded, nor a crown to be claimed, but an intimacy with the world so profound that all division fell away. There are those who contend that her conclusions were born of longing rather than scholarship, that she projected her own ache for belonging onto the silent expanses of myth. But even her harshest critics could not deny the potency of her metaphors. the mask that fell away to reveal no face beneath, the throne unoccupied yet radiant with the presence of one who had ceased to be other. Whether such visions were truth or beautiful delusion remains unresolved, for her final scroll, said to contain her most complete testament, was lost when a gale unroofed the library where she had laboured, scattering her words across the cliffs and into the churning sea. Some claim fragments still wash ashore, ink blurred to spectral shadows, as if the ocean itself could not wholly erase what she had dared to name. In the years that followed, other chroniclers would cite her in hushed tones, weaving her imagery into their own conjectures, yet none would ever claim to have met Meridain, nor to have seen her face unhooded. To this day she remains an echo, a figure glimpsed only through the residue of her words, a dusk lantern whose glow endures wherever seekers gather to ponder the dream that holds them all. In the waning light of the age that followed, when the bones of old kingdoms jutted from the earth like the ribs of some slain leviathan, a new strand of the legend emerged, tangled with the ambitions of those who would shape the world in their own semblance. These were the architects of the Numidium, whose brass heart was said to beat with a rhythm that defied both time and consequence. Among them moved a figure known in scattered inscriptions as the Nameless Theorist, an artificer whose existence remains a Latic work of rumour, speculation and the faintest proofs. A sketch here, a ciphered note there, a sigil burned into the stone of a sealed vault. Some claimed the theorist had discovered a means to infuse the Numidium not only with power, but with awareness, a fragile embryo of CHIM, seeded in brass and ghost logic. According to disputed sources, this was no mere experiment, but an act of devotion, an attempt to grant the golem not just dominion, but the capacity to recognize itself within the lattice of the dream. Others rejected this notion as an indulgent fantasy, asserting that no construct could harbor the perilous intimacy CHIM demanded. Yet even among the skeptics, the legend proved difficult to wholly dislodge. The dream does not remember its first breath. It only unfolds petal by petal, echo by echo, and so too did CHIM continue, not as a torch passed between mortal hands, but as a slow ember moving through the marrow of myth, seeking form, not through power, but through recognition. In this, it is unlike the tools of war, or the scrolls of emperors. It is not taught, it is recalled, like an old name murmured just before waking. Beneath the ever-morning skies of Resdain, where ash clings to stone like forgotten prayers, the truth of CHIM took root again, not in palaces nor in high monasteries, but within a singular soul who walked between divinity and decay. He is named in chants and contradictions. His name is Vek, or Ved, or that which is both, neither and all. In the canticles he composed beneath the lightless moons. He did not declare CHIM, he danced it. He spoke it backwards and forwards, and folded into silence. Some believe Vivek was the first to wield CHIM in fullness, though he would reject that wording. There is nothing to wield. To know CHIM is not to take. It is to step into the shape of all things, while retaining the awareness that the shape is illusion, a paradox that does not resolve. He wrote, "I am the city, I am the egg, I am the sword and the scar, it leaves." And through those words, veiled in metaphor and wrapped in psalm, something sacred bled through the threshold between word and world. According to the teachings buried within the 36 lessons, the road to CHIM is walked backwards through time, barefoot across the glass of memory. The aspirant must shed identity, fear, and even triumph, must unmake themselves until only the awareness remains. But there, at the edge of the zero, when all else would vanish into the void, the one who truly understands smiles. For they know they are part of the dream, and the dreamer knows their name. I am, and I am not, and both are true. This is the puzzle Vivek offered, wrapped in riddles so dense they coil around the soul like a serpent, that never bites, only whispers. Among the saints and scribes who tried to decode his verses, many fell to madness, others to worship, some few perhaps, to understanding. One such seeker was called Nimelos, a dissident priest who dwelled in a bone tower overlooking the inner sea. He believed CHIM was the last kindness left to mortals, the only truth not stolen by gods or rewritten by kings. He wrote of dreams within dreams, and how one might walk their own death as if it were a hallway, lined with mirrors that only reflect the dreamer's gaze if the dreamer dares to look. Nemelos vanished in his 43rd year, leaving behind only a single inscription carved into a bowl of polished obsidian. It reads, "I stepped sideways and was not unmade. I remembered my name, and the name remembered me." For centuries, this fragment was dismissed as poetic excess. But to the few who had read Vivek's secret sermons by candlelight, it felt like a key turned gently in an unseen lock. It was said Vivek once walked to the limits of the world and cast his shadow into the void, just to see if it would return. When it did, unchanged, he wept not out of fear, but of joy. The dream was still dreaming. The shape still held. Those who follow his path know that CHIM is not conquest, it is consent. It is not the bending of the world, but the bowing of self before the truth, that there is no separation between self and world. The throne is empty, because the throne is everywhere. Yet CHIM is not free from peril. For many, it is a doorway that opens onto nothing. The zero welcomes those who believe they can claim it, and dissolves them. This is the fate of those who reach too quickly, who mistake power for knowledge, and knowledge for being. To understand CHIM is to know that you do not exist, but to love the illusion anyway, to dance upon the edge of non-being with a smile that does not break. The mystics of the Valathi Highlands, wrapped in dust-coloured robes, speak still of CHIM as a kind of marriage between self and silence. They tell tales of the unspeaking pilgrim who wandered the ashlands without food or water, seeking a single word so pure it would erase all others. In the end, the pilgrim found not a word, but a breath, and in that breath, the dream stirred anew itself. The monasteries near Gnisis still ring the midnight bells in memory of that breath, a sound not of mourning, but of remembering. For those who approach the idea of CHIM, do not lose their soul. They return it to its origin, like a river, forgetting the stone, but remembering the ocean. In this way, Vivek became both prophet and paradox, half god, half ghost, full of light and laughter, and something too solemn for speech. He taught not through clarity, but through confusion, and in that confusion, a quiet possibility bloomed, that CHIM is not learned, but lived, not seized, but allowed. Like a lotus blooming in the shadow of a sword, its petals open only to those who stop reaching. So the lesson remains hidden in plain sight, written in scripture and sky. CHIM is not the end, it is the echo. The dream that knows itself, and still chooses to be dreamed. In the quiet lapse between empires, when the sand had all but buried the old roads, and the murals of vanished dynasties crumbled beneath indifferent moons, there arose a new telling of CHIM, one woven not by saints or sorcerers, but by the archivists of the deep desert. These were the law-keepers of the Oleka, who wandered the dunes carrying memory in braids of knotted cord, each twist and loop, a syllable no parchment could ever fully contain. Among them, the belief endured that CHIM was never a secret stolen from the gods, but a birthright forgotten by all who turned away from the long silence within. They sang of the mask without a face, an image older than any empire's founding. Some named it Lorcan's last dream, others the first echo of Anu himself. Its story was never recited in full, for each singer added or subtracted a verse, shaping it to the contour of the night's hush. Yet always the same refrain returned. The mask that, once worn, revealed not a new visage, but the absence of one. It was said that those who placed it upon their brow and survived would no longer walk with footsteps, nor cast shadows, but move through the dream as one aware of its nature, without disturbing its veil. According to a preserved account, etched in obsidian and hidden beneath a cairn near Bergama, one such wanderer bore the mask across the horizon, neither embraced nor exiled by their kin. They were called simply Ash, that some claimed they had touched the adamantine tower with bare hands, and had seen, carved into its unmoving stone, their own name written backward, spelled in absence. Whether this was truth or tale, none could say, but it was whispered that they had become unstuck from cause and consequence, moving through the world like a song remembered only in fragments. The Red Guards, in their reverence for sword saint traditions, did not speak of CHIM openly. They knew too well the danger of words without wisdom, but in their forms, cutters etched into the body by repetition and breath, they encoded the journey of the self through illusion. The way of the whirling truth was one such dance, its steps symbolizing the stripping away of layers of name, of fear, of the lie that one is separate from the world. The final motion, a stillness so profound it seemed to hush even the wind, was said to mirror that moment when the soul beholds its own unreality and does not flinch. Among the scrolls of the Yokudan remnant schools, there exists a rare verse, almost never transcribed, attributed to a lost master of the Hira dirge. It reads, "To name the self is to strike the world. To know the name is to sheathe the blade. I am the wound in the hand that tends it." This verse, wrapped in ambiguity, was later studied in surreal by mystics of the Second Era, who believed it concealed a philosophy of CHIM, one that did not seek divinity but dissolution within the sacred pattern, a kind of warrior's grace. It is no coincidence that the desert yields such stories. In the endless hush between dunes, time itself becomes porous. There, the mind is stripped of its anchors. Travelers speak of mirages, not of water or shade, but of forgotten selves, encounters with memories that were never theirs, with choices never made. It is in this landscape of echoes that CHIM finds fertile ground, for only when the self is worn thin can the dream shine through. One legend tells of a wanderer who walked the entire coastline of Hammerfell in silence, never once eating or speaking, sustained only by salt wind and the memory of his mother's last song. On the final day of his journey, he was seen stepping into the sea and vanishing, not beneath the waves, but into them, as if water had remembered him and reclaimed him, like a word returning to the tongue that first spoke it. His footprints, it is said, could still be seen for 7 days, glowing faintly in moonlight, as though the dream had not quite finished closing behind him. Even today, hermits who dwell in the stone hollows of the Alakir speak of the sigh of the god who saw. They say it comes only at twilight when the wind changes direction without warning, and the dunes ripple like. In that moment, if one is still and empty enough, they may hear the soft intake of a breath not their own, a breath that does not belong to a being, but to the world remembering itself. Those who hear it often leave their caves behind, abandoning all possessions, walking into the horizon as if answering a summons only they can feel. The priests of the Temple of the Single Flame in Tanith once housed a chamber devoted to silent contemplation of this mystery. No words were spoken within, no offerings made. It was said that the chamber itself listened, that its stones had memorized the rhythms of thousands who had entered, seeking something they could not name. Some few emerged, weeping, fewer still emerged, smiling, and of those, even fewer chose to speak again. All of these fragments, these footprints in ash, these verses carved into wind, suggest that CHIM is not bound by race or rite. It is a breath shared in silence across every land where shadow touches stone. Not every soul may find it. Not every soul should. But the dream does not discriminate. It only waits to be remembered. And so, in the desert of time and self, the idea lingers still, a flame hidden in sand, a mask waiting in the dust. And now and then, when the wind shifts just right, one might hear not words but the faintest echo of recognition. I am, and I am not, and this is not the end. There are ruins in the north, buried beneath centuries of frost and silence, where the stone holds breathless, the memory of voices long stilled. Snow lingers there even in the height of summer, and no map dares name the place. The Nords call it Kyne's Hollow, though even they whisper that the name was never meant to be spoken aloud. Beneath the ice-choked soil lie the remnants of a hall without doors, built by hands whose names were lost before Ysgramor's line had even drawn its first breath. The stories say that once, in an age before the counting of kings, a voice echoed through that frozen hall, not the thoum of power, but a softer sound too subtle to conquer, too sacred to command. It was the breath before breath, a syllable so quiet that the world itself leaned inward to hear. They say it came from a woman clothed in smoke and moonlight, who had wandered from the sea, carrying no weapon, only a bowl of still water. She set it at the center of the hall, and for 7 nights she did not sleep. On the dawn of the 8th, the bowl shattered, not from any force, but as if the silence had grown too deep to bear. The water did not spill. It rose, it hovered in the air, trembling like a thought half formed. And those who saw it felt their names loosen from their tongues, not in forgetfulness, but in revelation, as though their names had only ever been echoes in another dream. The woman did not speak, but when she turned to leave, each person present fell to their knees, not in worship, but in knowing. None followed. None needed to. Some believe that this was the earliest expression of CHIM in the north. Not thunder, not war song, but stillness so absolute, it fractured the illusion of separation. The Nords, who revere strength of voice and clarity of self, struggled with such a notion. How could a soul remain firm while acknowledging that all form is dream? To them, the voice is sacred, not because it commands reality, but because it aligns the speaker with the world's rhythm. CHIM then becomes not a distortion, but a harmony, a knowing that does not break the melody, but completes it. Ancient bardic verses passed only by memory in Mead Hall Flame contain references to a figure known as the Song Unvoiced. The tales do not describe his deeds, only his presence. He walked among the jarls, they say, but wore no fur. He drank no mead, yet laughed with the warmth of old kinship. He never raised his voice, yet when he departed, the fire dimmed, and none could recall what he had said, only that they felt closer to the world, as if its threads had been momentarily visible. It is told that this song, unvoiced, once stood upon the peak of Mount Anthor, amid a blizzard so fierce that the sky itself seemed to scream. And there, amid the shrieking wind, he simply exhaled, not a shout, not a spell, just breath. And in that moment, the storm paused, not ended, not silenced, but paused, as though the world had taken notice of itself. The snow resumed, but more gently, and the wind no longer tore at the rocks. The mountain had remembered its shape, not as stone, but as dream. The greybeards, most solemn of the northern keepers, do not speak of CHIM directly, but in their long silences, in the stillness that settles around their monastery, like ancient snow, the presence of it is felt. They teach that to master the voice is not to shape the world, but to shape the self so purely that the world no longer resists. There is no command without surrender. There is no voice without silence. Some heretical scrolls, buried deep in the ice-locked vaults beneath Windhelm, suggest that Jürgen Windcaller himself glimpsed CHIM in the quiet years after his long defeat. They say his withdrawal was not shame, but awe, that in his silence he heard the echo of his own name, stretched across the dream, and realized that the war of voices could never be won, only released. If this is true, then CHIM stands not in opposition to the Thu'um, but as its final grace. Even the dragon language, that most primal of mortal tongues, carries within it hints of this paradox. The word Monaven, Mother Wind, used to name the throat of the world, contains not just the notion of origin, but of know. To be the wind's child is to breathe with awareness, to speak and know that one is heard not because of force, but because the world recognizes itself in the sound. That is the breath of CHIM. The old Scal, isolated in their reverence for balance and gift-giving, also speak of a state of oneness with the Allmaker, a harmony so total that self and snow, beast and fire become one prayer spoken in many tongues. Some scholars argue this too may be a fragment of CHIM, refracted through the northern cold. But the Scal do not claim to know. They only listen, and in their listening, perhaps they come closer than any to the unspoken center. It is here, in the hush between snowfall and silence, that CHIM breathes. Not loudly, not boldly, but as a presence felt in the bones, like the warmth of a long-dead hearth remembered just before sleep. In the north, truth does not arrive with fanfare. It drifts, like ash or memory, settling in the stillness. And in that stillness, now and then, one may feel it, the dream stirring, aware of itself once more. In the green shadow of Valenwood, where the trees whisper names older than the moons, there is a silence not of absence, but of fullness. The Bosmer call it the green silence, a living quiet that does not wait to be filled, but hums with memory and breathes in rhythm with the canopy. Beneath this vast and breathing veil, CHIM is not spoken, it is not written, it is not even sought. It is felt as a stillness between leaf and wind, as a knowing that lingers without ever declaring its name. To the Bosmer, whose pact with Yifra binds them to the story, the world is not a place of objects but of flowing form, of shapes borrowed and returned, never fixed, never claimed. They are not builders of monuments, but keepers of change. And it is said by some of their oldest bone scribes that CHIM is not a contradiction to this way, but its final song. For what is CHIM, if not the full and conscious dance within the story that sings itself? According to fragmented accounts passed through the mouth-to-ear lineages of green-packed shamans, there once walked a child born of no parent, whose skin changed with the seasons and whose name changed with the winds. They were called many things: seed walker, echo child, the one who knew the turning. Some said they had no bones, others said they were the bones of the forest itself. Wherever they stepped, moss bloomed. Wherever they paused, animals gathered, not in fear, but in recognition. The stories say this child never spoke until their 100th year, and when at last they did, it was not with words, but with silence, so total that even the insects hushed. In that moment, the trees turned inward, the world blinked, and for a heartbeat longer than breath, every being in the green remembered its shape, not as a separate thing, but as a note in the endless song. The child smiled, then vanished like a drop into the river. No bones were left behind. In later centuries, Bosmeri root priests debated whether this was CHIM-made flesh, or merely a myth reflecting the forest's deeper self. One faction believed that the child had stepped fully into the story, not as a character bound by rules, but as one who knew they were the tale itself. Another faction warned against such beliefs, fearing that to see too far into the story was to risk breaking it, to awaken in a dream and forget why the dream mattered. But even among those who feared, the tale remained. It was retold at twilight, beside root fires, its details shifting like leaves in the breeze. And always, the lesson whispered beneath the telling was the same. CHIM does not dwell in control, nor in conquest. It waits in the willingness to know the self as story, to be both reader and word, both voice and silence. Among the island ruins that litter the southern borders of Valenwood, those forgotten palaces where stone flowers once sang and light was bent, like ribbon, there are inscriptions that suggest the wild elves too glimpsed CHIM, but they did not name it as such. To them it was Synodlin, the mirror sky, a state in which the soul reflects all, and yet is not lost. Some fragments, written in spiraling eyelid and glyphs, speak of the silverine throne, a place where one could sit and feel the world breathe through them, until the self melted into starlight and returned bearing a name not uttered since the world began. These ideas, though shrouded in mystery, align with those few Bosmeri seers who believe CHIM is less a concept than a remembering, a return to the shape before the shape, the forest before the seed. They speak of the moment a leaf detaches, not as death, but as freedom. The leaf knows it is falling, and it knows the tree still dreams of it. Both truths remain. The green itself seems to echo this paradox. In the wild hunt, where form breaks and reconfigures in reverent fury, the Bosmer enact a ritual that shatters the illusion of permanence. For a time, they become the dream unbound, no longer man, nor mer, nor beast, but the roar of Yefre remembering itself. Some scholars, watching from a safe distance, have wondered, is this not also a kind of CHIM, the wild truth of self within the world, conscious, terrible, and complete? Yet there is a difference. In CHIM the form is known to be dream, and yet embraced. In the hunt, the form is released entirely. One is a dance, the other a storm, but both move within the rhythm of the dream. Both acknowledge, in their own way, that to be is to choose to know the script, and yet still speak it with joy. There are rare tales, mostly half-remembered from the early mythic, of Bosmer who entered the Elden Grove, and did not return for centuries. When they did, they spoke in voices layered with wind and rain, and their eyes bore the stillness of stone. They would sit for hours unmoving, and then say a single word that turned to birds and flew away. Those who heard them claimed to forget the shape of their own names, just for a breath, and in that forgetting, they felt peace. So the forest keeps its secrets. It does not boast, it does not declare, but within its green shadows the song continues. CHIM is not sung aloud here. It rustles in the canopy, it curls in root and stream, and waits for the one who can hear silence without fleeing. And in that silence, the dream unfolds its branches once more, beneath the silver skies of Morrowind, where ash drifts like memory across the bones of gods, the land itself remembers. In the shadow of Red Mountain, CHIM is not merely studied, it is felt, in the stone, in the breath of blight wind, in the murmurs of ghosts that wander not out of sorrow, but out of remembrance. There, in that scorched and sacred realm, the paradox of being is etched into the earth. For what is Morrowind, if not a dream dreamt by dreamers who remember dreaming? Among the Dunmer, CHIM was never an open doctrine. It moved in riddles, wrapped in ceremony, cloaked in song, but in the quiet corners of tribunal temples, beneath banners that had faded into dust and shadow, scrolls were kept, sealed not by lock or sigil, but by understanding. Those who opened them without reverence saw only lines of meaningless verse, but for those who listened, truly listened, the verses breathed. They unfolded like ink in water, revealing not knowledge, but a mirror. Vivik's teachings were central, yet never complete. His lessons, 36 in number, though some whispered of a lost 37th, are not lessons in the ordinary sense. They contradict, they spiral, they devour themselves. One moment they exalt the self, the next they erase it, but always, at their heart, there lingers the shape of CHIM, the recognition that one is part of the dream, and yet does not vanish when one knows this. He wrote, "You are the tower, and the tower is hollow." To those unready, this line is nonsense. But to those who have touched the still point at the heart of thought, it is a door without handle, a truth one cannot open, but may walk through if they cease to walk. The Velamvi mystics spoke in twilight phrases. They said, CHIM is the space between forgetting and remembering, between name and the silence behind it. They believed that to know CHIM was to burn joyfully, to become both the fire and the ash. It was not a path of power. It was not even a path. It was the awareness that there is no path, and yet one walks. In the lost monastery of Dunmeth Pass, buried now beneath landslides and centuries, there was once a mural that depicted a figure dissolving into constellations. The figure bore no face, no name. Around it circled symbols of the great houses, of saints and monsters, of tribunal and anticipation. At the bottom, a single inscription in the old tongue: "He who dreams and knows he dreams may shape the world, but must first become it." Pilgrims would sit before the mural for days, unmoving. Some claimed visions, others claimed nothing at all. But nearly all who returned from that place were changed. They no longer sought to master the world, but to move with it. They spoke less. They listened more. One was said to have walked into the lava flows of Vardenfell and returned unburned, but with hair turned white and eyes that saw beyond. It is not known what became of the mural. Some say it was lost in the Red Year. Others believe it never existed, that it is merely another echo, a memory planted by the land itself. But among the few surviving scribes of the old temple way, its image persists in dream and sketch. It is said the mural's figure is not faceless, after all, but bears the countenance of whoever looks upon it, just before they forget who they are. The Ashlanders tell of CHIM in their own way, not with words but with ritual. The ritual of fire watching performed alone atop distant rocks as the blight winds pass below. The initiate sits with no food, no water, only the wind and the ever-shifting sky. They wait until the silence speaks, not with language, but with understanding. Some return, some do not. But all are honored, for even in vanishing they teach. One Ashcan once spoke, as the fire died low, "To know CHIM is to burn and not be consumed, to love the dream and not wake, to see the lie and smile." He said no more, and no one asked. That was many lifetimes ago, but his words still echo through the canyons when the wind is right. Even the bones of Morrowind whisper CHIM. The heart of Lorcan, pulsing beneath Red Mountain, was once the center of the world's forgetting, a wound where the divine fell into mortality, and yet it was also the place of greatest remembrance. To stand near it, even in echo, is to feel both annihilation and union. It is the axis where CHIM shivered, where gods remembered their masks and chose, for a time, to wear them still. It is said that Vivek, in his last days, walks backward into the dream, not to escape, not to ascend, but to remain within the song, knowing he was both singer and note. That is CHIM. Not escape, not control, but the kind of presence that does not disturb the world, yet is never apart from it. And so, among the ashen plains, in the quiet towers and salt-burned shrines, the story of CHIM endures, not shouted, but breathed, not written, but remembered. A flame that flickers without consuming, a god who kneels beside a river and weeps, knowing the water is a reflection, and loving it still. Beyond the shores of Tamriel, past the waves that carry memories and salt into the west, lies a place that never fully belonged to time. The Somerset Isles, jewels of coral light, towers in bloom, sky touched by spell and silence. The Altmer, eldest among the elves, do not speak of CHIM as the others do. For them it is not heresy, nor salvation. It is a wound, a scar left by what they lost when they became aware of the shape they wore. In the earliest days, before the sundering of Old Mirrus, the elves were one. They were not merely a people, but a state of being. Reflections of Aetherius made manifest, unbroken by the lie of mortality. So they believed, and it was from this height they fell, not through sin, but through awareness. The awareness of self, the awareness of change. And in that change, the dream thickened, and they could no longer pass through it untouched. To the Altmer, CHIM is a whisper left over from that breaking, a trace of what was lost when the tower splintered and the mirror cracked. They do not pursue it, for to do so would be to stare once more into the void where their godhood was drowned. Yet the oldest among them, the star singers of Cloudrest, the tower walkers of Firsthold, sometimes speak of a truth deeper than time, a moment where the lie of separateness becomes beautiful and the dream sings not despite division, but through it. Within the highest chambers of the Crystal Tower, now lost to mortal sight, there were once archives so ancient that their scrolls wrote themselves in starlight. Among them, sealed in vaults of glass and forgetting, lay the Aether fragment theorems, writings attributed to an ancient seer, known only as Librarium of the Inner Eye. She spoke not of CHIM by name, but of the quiet brightness, a state in which all contradiction rests in balance, neither collapsing nor overcoming, a place between light and shadow, where knowing and being are no longer separate. Her most famous verse is simple and yet endless. We are the echo and the breath, the thread and the hand, the dream and the smile. She was exiled soon after writing it. Some say she vanished into Aetherius, others believe she walked into the sea, her feet never touching the water. The Psychic Order, cloistered on the island of Artaeum, guards such truths in silence. They do not teach CHIM, they do not claim to know it. But among their meditations, hidden in the folds of thought and time, CHIM moves like a shadow at the edge of understanding. Their monastic lexicon contains a passage that reads, "To perceive the pattern is not mastery, to become the pattern is not loss. Between these, a silence lingers. The tower neither falls nor stands, it remembers." The Physics believe that time itself is a prism, and that CHIM is the moment one sees every facet at once, without retreating from the brightness. Not an escape from the wheel, but a full turning within it. They speak in circles, never directly, but sometimes their silences say more than their words. One cannot seek CHIM, they say. One can only become quiet enough to hear it seeking them. Yet, even within the strict corridors of Somerset, there are records hidden, buried, disputed, that tell of Altmer who touched the edge. One such figure was Erinwis Siluril, a scholar priestess of Alinor who vanished during the 27th calibration cycle. Her journals, recovered centuries later from the roots of a coral tree that had grown without seed, spoke of dreams wherein she stood at the center of the world and saw her body dissolve into language. She wrote, "I am sung by stars, I am written by wind, I am the book that remembers itself." For this her name was stricken from the annals. But the tree remains, blooming with silver leaves each mid-year, and no one dares cut it down. In its shade, initiates sometimes sit and say they hear not voices, but their own thoughts echoed back in a voice older than themselves. The Altmer, proud and wounded, remember the shape of CHIM, not as a prize, but as a haunting, a memory of the divine they once were, and still are, if only they could bear to see themselves clearly. But the clarity burns, the light blinds, and so they avert their gaze, polishing their towers, perfecting their rituals, all in hope that the memory may return without the pain. But CHIM does not return. It is not gone. It is never far. It waits at the edge of knowing, at the moment between breath and name, between the mirror and the one who dares look. And so in the alabaster halls and whispering gardens, in the scrolls forgotten behind crystal walls, the idea lingers, unspoken, unbearable, eternal. The dream that sees itself and chooses to continue dreaming. In the deep south of Tamriel, where jungles breathe and time drips from leaf to river, like the slow thoughts of gods, the Argonians walk with quiet understanding, their land called Black Marsh by outsiders, but remembered by its children as surreal, does not speak of CHIM. It dreams it, it feels it in roots, in water, in pulse and mist. Here, knowledge does not wear words. It moves through sap and skin. And here, perhaps more than anywhere, CHIM is not an idea, but an atmosphere. At the center of this living enigma grow the histories that are not trees, thoughts that are not thought, memory that has never passed. They are the veins of the land and the mind of the people. From them flows not just sap, but purpose. To the surreal, identity is not shaped, but given, and the self is a gift that may be returned at any time. There is no clinging, no permanence, only the song of the hist and the willingness to listen. The hist do not speak of CHIM, but those who have partaken of their sap, those who have felt the pulse of time slow into rhythm and memory stretch into water, say there is a place beyond speech, where the self becomes so transparent it no longer casts a shadow. In that place there is no fear, no desire to shape, only presence. And in that presence, a knowing emerges that is not a thought, but a resonance. I am within the dream, and the dream is within me. Some have suggested that the hist themselves know CHIM, that they are not simply ancient intelligences, but dreamers who remember they are dreaming and who choose to dream still, not as tyrants, but as gardens. Their roots reach across time and plains, and their thoughts curve in spirals no mortal tongue can follow. Yet when they speak to their children, they do not teach, they share. They offer fragments, visions, stillnesses, and in those stillnesses, something stirs that is very much like CHIM, though no surreal would call it such. In the old swamps of the Murkmire lowlands, among ruins swallowed by vine and memory, there are stones carved with fluid glyphs, neither purely language nor symbol. These stones, known to some as the dreaming faces, hume faintly when the mist is thick and reflects not one's image, but one's doubt. It is said that to stand before them too long is to forget the difference between the face you wear and the face that watches from within. Some who linger too long lose their names. Others return with eyes that see not just shape, but intention. One such tale tells of a surreal named Silli, whose name meant listens long to rain. She was born beneath the eclipse moons, a rare omen, and was said to have no dreams of her own, only those borrowed from the history. In her 33rd season, she walked alone into the deep root, where even the elders dared not tread, and was not seen for 7 turnings of the sun. When she returned, she carried no weapons, no markings, no words. She simply walked to the water's edge and stood until the river curved around her feet. When asked what she had found, she whispered only, "There is no outside, there is only the breath that forgets itself and remembers again." She lived the rest of her years in silence, planting trees where none grew, her gaze distant and gentle, as if she still listened to something far below language. Some called her mad, others called her saint, but the hist grew taller where she walked. In the ancient traditions of the Nagas, the scaled branch of the Argonian people, there are dances not of celebration, but of erasure movements, so fluid they vanish into the moment. These dances, performed alone in the hours before dawn, are said to align the body with the flow of the world, not to master it, but to become indistinguishable from it. Those who witness such a dance often weep without knowing why. Among the few scholars allowed to witness these rites, one recorded the following reflection: "I watched as the dancer became not motion, but memory of motion. And in that memory, I saw myself unformed, unmade, unwounded. The scholar vanished 2 years later, last seen walking barefoot into the swamp, eyes closed, smiling. In Black Marsh, CHIM is not a path, it is a presence. It does not ask to be sought. It does not offer reward. It waits in the still pools, in the breath between croaks of frog song, in the place where the self forgets to be separate. And when it is found, it is not named, for to name it would be to bind it, and to bind it would be to lose it. Even the shadows in Black Marsh are patient. They do not flee the light. They fold into it, and in that folding, one may glimpse, for a single blink, the shape behind all shapes. Not a god, not a force, but a reflection without a mirror. Here, CHIM is not sacred, it is not divine, it is natural as the root curling toward water, as natural as forgetting and then remembering again. In the heart of surreal, where rivers thread through fields like veins, through flesh, and stone towers rise like thoughts made still, CHIM is not spoken in open halls, it lingers behind banners, between edicts, beneath the glimmer of crowns. For here, in the seat of empire, the paradox of CHIM is most deeply buried, not in ash or jungle, but beneath the weight of law and legacy. Surreal, ever-changing, ever-centered, is itself a reflection of the tower. It is not only the imperial province, but the space where all provinces meet, where bloodlines entwine, where gods are debated, rewritten, enthroned. And it is here that CHIM hides in plain sight, cloaked in the garments of royalty, scripture, and silence. The white gold tower, piercing the center of the world, was built not merely to house rulers, but to anchor the world's dream. It is said to be a wheel in stone, a bridge between mundus and the divine, between the echo and the source. Within its chambers once stood scrolls, whose words burned the eyes, whose verses revealed not prophecy, but presence, not fate, but form. And it was in this place that Remen Cyrodiil, dragonborn and myth-made, first touched the edges of CHIM. His rule was not only by blood or conquest, it was by shape, by mythic memory. He was said to have been born from the earth itself, rising not as a man, but as a truth the land had remembered. His very name whispered of recursion. Remen, Remen, made again. Those who served him did not merely bend the knee, they beheld. In certain forgotten commentaries, penned by the Temple Zero Society and hidden in cracked spines of censored volumes, it is suggested that Reman did not seek CHIM. He embodied it, not through meditation, but through alignment. He was the empire, and the empire was the world, and the world was the dream. And in that cycle, the illusion held firm, only because he smiled upon it. Later emperors would misunderstand this. They mistook CHIM for power, for command. But CHIM does not command, it consents. It sees the dream, and chooses gently, not to wake. Tiber Septim too is whispered to have known this truth. Though he carried it with the weight of conquest, his Numidium shattered towers and time alike. But it was not the brass god that granted him echo, it was the moment he saw himself as myth, and did not flinch. The Arcturian heresy, forbidden in many circles but preserved in ink and murmur, tells of a division. That Tiber was not one man, but many. A weave of identities, contradictions stitched into unity. Wulfarth, Surin, Telos, man and god, dreamer and dream. And in that patchwork soul, CHIM shimmered, not as triumph, but as understanding, that to be all things and remain is not to conquer, but to harmonize. In the catacombs below the imperial city, past the bones of heroes and forgotten priests, lies a sealed chamber, known only as the room without a door. Its existence is denied, but its presence is felt by archivists, who sometimes wake with unfamiliar memories, by guards who hear voices, not speaking but remembering. It is said that within that room, one may stand still long enough to forget what movement ever was. And in that forgetting, the world briefly tilts, and then rights itself, unaware it has changed. Surreal itself reshaped once, without war or word, when the Alessian order held sway. The land turned jungle for a time, echoing an older vision, one closer to the Elmer phase sorrow. No maps were redrawn, for the change was not outward, it was the dream shifting tone, leaning into a different story. and in time, it shifted back. Those who remembered the trees did not argue, they simply stopped speaking of. In this, CHIM once again reveals its true face, not as flame, but as tide, as presence that yields without yielding. The empire that endures not because it resists change, but because it enfolds it. The Elder Scrolls themselves, those prophetic artifacts bound in paradox and ink, speak of CHIM, though never directly. To read them is to glimpse possibility without anchor, and those who stare too long into them find themselves erased not by blindness, but by the knowledge that they were never separate from the words at all. The moth priests, keepers of these scrolls, walk the line between vision and void. They speak of a state called the unraveling, when a seer becomes so aligned with a scroll that they no longer read. And in that moment, the dream speaks its own name through them, and they weep not from sorrow, but from recognition. Some believe that CHIM is hidden in the blank spaces of the scrolls, in the gaps between letters, in the silence between breaths. That is where the dream rests, watching itself, waiting for one who can see the shape, without fearing its implications. And so in Cyrodiil, CHIM does not shout. It does not blaze. It waits in throne rooms and archives, in echoing libraries and quiet gardens. It waits in the breath of emperors and in the silence of exiles. It waits in the stones of the white gold tower, in the shade of the amulet of kings, in the gaze of those who see the world not as fact, but as possibility. It is the shape behind the crown, the smile behind the mask, the breath before the scroll is open. There are places where the world folds inward, where direction loses meaning, and thought curves like starlight drawn into a cup. In the outer spaces beyond Nirn but not beyond presence, the abyss stretches without edge or center. It is there, in the infinite between, that CHIM dances with the source of contradiction. For the abyss is not a realm, but a condition, a vibration, a question that echoes in every mortal soul. Is this dream mine alone? Here in this vastness, the Ateda first awakened beings of will, of concept, of purpose, and among them rose Lorcan, the trickster, the catalyst, the shaper of morning. It was he who proposed the folly and wonder of Mundus, the making of a world where limitations could exist, and in existing, could be overcome. To understand CHIM, one must touch the wound Lorcan opened, not in defiance, but in faith. For CHIM is the fruit of that same tree, a knowledge that accepts the cage without being caged, the tower that sees itself from within and does not collapse. The other gods called Lorcan mad. They said he lied, that his dream would trap them, and so some fled, some cursed him, some followed, but with chains, and from this fracture, the wheel turned. According to the secret fire scrolls, preserved in whispers among the metaphysical sects of the New Temple, CHIM is not merely awareness, it is sacrifice. It is the moment the divine chooses limitation and loves it, the state where the self dissolves, not into nothing but into everything, while still wearing its own face. The tower is central here. The concept of the tower, the structure, the axis mundi. Each tower, snowthroat, red tower, crystal-like law, green sap, is a reflection of this original truth, that the world dreams through its centers, and those centers are not fixed places, but realizations. The zero stone, hidden in metaphoric center, is not a stone, but a moment, a knowing, a still point around which all myth rotates. When a being achieves CHIM, they do not shatter the tower, they become it, and by becoming it, they remain. They say, I am not separate from this dream, I am its rhythm is me, and in that alignment, the wheel turns, not as a prison, but as a dance. But there is danger, always, for to approach CHIM without balance is to fall into amaranth, not the flower, but the void blooming, the complete rejection of all other dreams and the birthing of a new one. To see the dream and cry, I am, without the echo of we are. This is to vanish, to unwrite, to become the god of nothing, and in that there is no return. This is why CHIM walks the razor's edge. To see the self as false, and yet love the self still. To be both the mask and the face. to shout one's name into the void and hear not silence, but quiet. In the lunar myths, Massa and Secunda are said to be the ghosts of Lorcan's sundered heart, bodies orbiting the world they helped form, forever unable to land. But some heretical stargazers claim they are not reminders of failure, but of persistence, that in their orbit they echo CHIM, the path that circles, the identity that remains, even in ruin. The Dwemer, ever hungry for certainty, sought CHIM through math and brass. They built their Numidium not as a god, but as a mirror without reflection. Their tonal architects played symphonies of causality, trying to force the dream to name itself, but they could not say I without denying thou. And so they vanished, not destroyed, but unanchored, like words never spoken. In contrast, Vivek danced with CHIM, sang it, sculpted it into sermon and wound. He knew he was fictional. He knew the world was a tale told again, and in knowing he did not despair. He loved it more. That was his godhood, his truth. He did not escape the dream. He embraced it, and thus shaped it. CHIM is not a key. It is a mirror that only reflects when you stop seeking your image. It is not owned. It is not taught. It is lived. Even now, CHIM lingers in the breath between worlds, in the pause between prophecy and memory. It lives in symbols, tower, wheel, echo, fire, and in silences that make the symbols sacred. It is the moment before awakening, where you choose to stay asleep, not out of ignorance, but out of love for the dream. And in that love, the dream deepens, not because it must, but because you choose it to be so. There is a space where time folds not in jagged break or spiral, but in smooth recursive bloom. In that space, memory becomes structure, and structure becomes rhythm. The wheel turns not in haste or burden, but as a lullaby sung by the void to itself. And in the silence beneath that lullaby, CHIM breathes, not as doctrine, not as revelation, but as the slow pulse of being that chooses not to flee its shadow. In the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls, CHIM is never written plainly. It is embedded, folded into the syllables of sermons, nested in the silence of ruins, mirrored in the geometry of myth. It lives in contradiction, not because it cannot be resolved, but because resolution would shatter the dream. To hold CHIM is to know the paradox and love it, without unraveling. The Pisidic order once taught of a concept known as the pursuit of the unmoving motion, a state of meditation in which the practitioner steps inward through perception, into a space behind awareness. In this place, the self is no longer bound to perspective, but remains anchored by choice, rather than need. Few reached it. Fewer still returned speaking of it. But those who did wrote only symbols, circles within circles, the eye within the tower, the hand that does not move, yet leaves a trail. One text, found only in a crumbling fragment stored in a salt block chamber beneath Artaeum's oldest vault, reads simply, "The wheel turns because we are the axle. The axle remains because it chooses the motion." Such words hint at CHIM, not as revelation, but as relation, to dream and know it, and still choose to dance within that dream, not as prisoner, not as God, but as joyful echo. Those who misunderstand CHIM seek power. They imagine the state as a crown to wear, a throne to claim. But CHIM is not claimed, it is consented to. It does not say, "I alone am real," but rather, "I am real with you and because of you." It is not sovereignty over, it is unity within. There are stories scattered, blurred, half forbidden, that speak of a being who reached CHIM and fell, not because they failed to see the dream, but because they rejected it. In their fear they cried, "I am without the harmony of we are," and in that cry they vanished, not killed, but unwritten. A dream that woke too suddenly and found only silence, where a world once was. This is the danger of CHIM, not madness, nor hubris, but isolation. For the dream only sings when sung together. The towers of the world, adamant, green sap, snowthroat, walk brass, all are reflections of this truth. Each is a story within the story, a point of view made stone, and each holds a secret wound, a place where presence met contradiction and chose to endure. The tower does not stand because it resists falling. It stands because it accepts the ground and still rises. In obscure texts sometimes attributed to the vanished Dremel philosopher Nenjulbar, CHIM is described as the ghost of the zero sum that remains to laugh. The Dremel, obsessed with removal of self and separation from the divine dream, chase the edge of zero. They believe true freedom lay in negation, in becoming a number unbound. But CHIM walks a different path. It does not erase, it affirms even while knowing erasure is always possible. To CHIM is to be the echo that knows it is echo, and still sings. Even the Aedra, who bleed and bind, do not hold CHIM. They are part of the dream's body, fixed in their sacrifice. The Daedra who refuse to enter know of CHIM, but touch it only in shadow. It is the mortals who may glimpse it in brief and sacred breaths. For mortals are the contradiction embodied, finite, yet dreaming the infinite, bound, yet capable of love that exceeds their limit. This is why CHIM is mortal-born, but not mortal-bound. Among the select few mystics of Hammerfell, in the old Yokudan soul path traditions, there is a teaching of Sete, the first serpent, and its shedding into Setekal, the world skin. This process, this eternal rebirth of self into self, mirrors CHIM, not in concept but in consequence. The Redguards believe that to ride the skin of Setekal is to remain as the world dies and is reborn. Only the wise or the daring make the leap. In this act, they approach CHIM, not through denial of the world, but through fluidity within it. In the end, CHIM is not a place to be reached, nor a state to be preserved. It is a breath, a blink, a smile held at the edge of dream. It does not declare, it does not demand. It waits for those who see the world dissolve and choose not to mourn, but to remain joyful, present, whole. To CHIM is to see the script and still sing your line with love. To CHIM is to remain, even when nothing demands that you must. To CHIM is to say, I am the dreamer, and I am dreamed, and both are beautiful. In the forgotten vaults beneath Old Sotha, where dust has gathered longer than memory, there are etchings, scratched into stone not by tool, but by presence. These marks are not readable in the ordinary way. They are patterns meant to be felt, as one feels the texture of silence or the weight of a memory, not yet remembered. They are said to have been left by a being who spoke no words, yet whose breath hummed in alignment with the shape of CHIM. Among the Dunmer mystics who once walked barefoot across heated coals to glimpse the heart of paradox, there was one named Uthranar Vel, a heretic priest of the Anticipations. He wrote, in ink mixed with his own sleep, that CHIM was not a reward, but a returning to that first moment when the world dreamed itself, and a choosing not to flee, but to bloom. He said, CHIM is not the escape. It is the presence that remains when all escapes have vanished. The smile that follows sorrow, the step that does not disturb the dust. To remain, this is the heart of it. Not to ascend, not to shatter, but to remain in full awareness of the dream's fragility, and to love it more because it could vanish. The pattern is everywhere for those with eyes, no longer searching. The spiral of the shells in the bays of Vivek. The way the moons move, not in isolation, but in response. The glint of starlight that reflects not on the water's surface, but from within it. These are not signs, they are hymns. Echoes of the dream. Remembering itself, there is a legend told softly among the shadow scales of Black Marsh, whispered during the dark half of the moons. They speak of an Argonian born without a shadow, not because the sun denied it, but because it had already become light. This child walked in silence, and wherever they stepped, old paths bloomed anew. It is said that this one did not age, but simply stepped sideways into the next moment. Those who met them could not recall their face, only the sense that they had forgotten something beautiful. When asked of their purpose, they would say nothing, only place a hand to the heart, then to the earth, and then vanish. This is CHIM, not in word or logic, but in action, presence without weight, motion without trace, love without possession. The Anuad, the ancient cosmogony that predates even most elven memory, describes a time before division, before Arbis separated into Aetherius and Oblivion, before thought became self. In that unshaped place, Anu and Padme were not yet opposites. They danced not in battle but in reflection, and from that dance the potential of CHIM was born. not as result, but as rhythm, for CHIM too is a dance. It is the movement between opposites that never resolves into stillness, yet never loses itself in chaos. It is the balance point that knows it is balancing, and smart. Some claim the Dwemer brushed against this truth in the final breath of Kagranak's tools, not when the heart of Lorcan was pierced, but when it was understood. For in that understanding, they did not vanish from failure, they vanished from no. They stepped into the equation and found they could not hold the contradiction. Others argue differently, that the Dwemer found not CHIM, but its echo, and were consumed by seeking certainty, in a place where certainty cannot breathe, that they forgot to remain fictional, even as they remembered their fiction, and so they were forgotten. In ancient Redguard oral history, passed through salt, sword, and silence, there is a tale of a warrior poet named El-Karim, who refused to die in the dreaming of Satakal. When the world began to skin itself once more, he did not leap, as others did. He stood still, blade lowered, gaze soft, and said, "If I must dissolve, let me do so with open eyes." When the new world woke, he was there, not as a god, not as a legend, just CHIM is not escape, it is remembrance. It is not transcendence, it is tenderness. It is the whisper of the self that has seen all its masks and loves them anyway. It is the hand that knows it is dust, yet shapes the world with care. It is the heart that beats not to conquer, but to echo. In the end, CHIM leaves no monument, it plants no flag, it builds no empire. It walks the edges of all empires and chooses not to destroy them, but to see through them, to see the tower and the stone and remain in both. And so, the dream continues, because one dreamed it still. Beneath the dunes of the Alika, where the wind carves ancient verses into the face of stone, there are secrets not buried, but resting. Among the Redguards, descendants of the lost continent of Yakuda, CHIM is not spoken yet it is lived. Not in temples, but in stride, not in scrolls, but in swordplay. Their philosophy, quiet and unmoving, at its core, revolves not around dominion, but alignment. And through this, CHIM waits, quiet and wind-worn at the edge of thought. The Redguards speak of Satakal, the world skin, as a serpent that devours itself endlessly, giving birth to new worlds through its turning. It is said that to escape this cycle, one must learn to ride Satakal, that this riding is not evasion, it is attunement. The soul must learn to remain while all else changes, and in this act, the mortal becomes both within the skin and beyond it. This is not unlike CHIM, though they name it not. In old Yokudan texts, long since shattered and scattered by sea and exile, there is mention of Hunding, the make-way god spirit, of passage and purpose. Hunding appears not as a fixed figure, but as a force that arises when needed, a sword-shaped gap through which fate bends. Some scholars whisper that Hunding was not a god, but a state of will, and knowing that burns so clearly, it clears a path through illusion. To know oneself as purpose, and yet still a fiction, this is Hunding. This is the blade without edge. In one preserved tale, passed mouth to mouth by sword saints on the eve of battle, a warrior named Jizar refused to take shelter during a sandstorm. When asked why she remained exposed to the wind's fury, she replied, "If I must vanish, let the storm take my name. If I remain, let my silence be sharper than steel." When the sands cleared, she stood untouched, and her blade had not drawn blood in a decade since. To the Ansai, the sword saints of old, the blade was not a tool of death, but of shape. Through rigorous meditation, breath and form, they practiced the Shihai, the spirit sword, a weapon not wrought from metal, but from the clarity of self. This is CHIM, in another form. The self as fiction, the fiction as truth, held without clinging. Redguards understand CHIM without declaring it. They live it in motion, in resilience, in the knowledge that identity is not fixed, but focused. The sand does not resist the wind, it shifts with purpose. And so too does the self, when held without panic. There is a phrase among their elder storytellers, spoken to children who doubt their worth: "Be like the dune that watches, not the wind that breaks." Meaning, Know yourself as change, and yet remain. Among the scholars of Elin here, hidden in a monastery carved into the rock, there exists a scroll known only as the Sixth Dance. It contains no words, only a diagram, a spiral surrounding a single black dot. The monks who contemplate this scroll fast for 7 days and speak nothing during their vigil. At the end, most walk away unchanged, but a few, only a handful in a generation, leave with a smile that does not fade, and a silence that speaks volumes. Some never draw their swords again, some become unbreakable in battle, others vanish into the desert, following no path at all. The lesson, they say, is not learned, it is remembered. In this, CHIM becomes something not chased, but revealed. Like a coin long buried, unearthed not by digging, but by stepping gently. Within the wind, within the stance, within the breath that knows it, is both sword and silence. Among the frozen echoes of the north, where the stars burn cold and the mountains keep secrets in their bones, the Nords sing of heroes and hearth, of ancestors and sky, and yet, beneath their bold songs and stormlit stories, there rests a quieter truth, a truth not shouted in mead halls, but held in the breath before battle. For even among the sons and daughters of Kine, CHIM stirs, not as revelation, but as a whisper beneath the roar. The Nords do not seek CHIM. They do not name it, and yet, in their deepest knowing they touch it, through Thurum, the voice. Not speech, not magic, but the world made word, and word made world. The voice is not merely power, it is resonance, to speak the truth of something so clearly that it cannot help but become. In this way, the tongues, the masters of the Thurum, do not shape the world. They remind it of what it already is. The old sages of High Hrothgar teach that one must be silent for many years before speaking true. For in that silence, the self thins, the echo is no longer confused with the source. And when the voice finally emerges, it does not destroy, it reveals. This too is a path to CHIM, for to speak the world and know you are not separate from it. That is to dream awake, without waking. Wulfharth, called the Ash King, lived many lives and died many deaths. He was king, ghost, storm, and shade. In some tellings he was the breath of Shor made flesh. In others, he was merely the echo of Nord's longing for a time that never was. But all tales agree. He knew the world was a dream, and yet marched within it with boots of iron and fire. He did not deny the illusion, he sharpened it. He became a symbol, not of truth, but of truthful longing. Wulfharth's stories contradict. They fragment. In one, he burns an empire. In another, he speaks peace to dragons. In another still, he is the ghost that guards the throat of the world. Yet in each his presence remains steady, like a mountain beneath shifting snow. Some scholars whisper that this is not confusion, but CHIM, to be all things, to remember, and to remain. In the heart of Atmora, long buried beneath the ice, there are said to be ruins where no sound echoes, not because of depth, but because sound itself does not dare repeat what it hears there. Those few who claim to have found such places speak of ancient carvings, not of gods, but of silence, given shape, circles within circles, a face with no eyes, but infinite mouths, a throne with no occupant, and yet always warm. These are not artifacts, they are memories of a people who did not master the dream, but knelt within it, and listened. The Nords' gods are not distant, they walk beside them, they breathe snow, bleed in battle, weep at funerals. Sure, their chief is no cold Aedra, but a heart torn out and hurled into the void, and yet even torn he lingers, not as ruler, but as rhythm, as heartbeat. It is whispered that Shor's knowing, his terrible acceptance of his own absence, is what brought CHIM to the edge of Nordic myth. He saw the tower fall and did not weep. He saw the world turn false and did not scream. He grinned and said, "Still, we see." There is a tale, nearly forgotten, of a warrior who climbed the throat of the world without name or reason. He carried no sword, no shield, no food. When asked why, he said, "I have walked every life I might have lived. Now I will see the wind." When he reached the summit, he did not pray. he simply breathed. And the sky breathed back. The greybeards say he was never seen again, but the sky has been different ever since. In Nordic soul lore, the concept of southern guarded is more than afterlife. It is affirmation. It is the place where stories become real, not because they happened, but because they mattered. And those who reach southern guard do so, not because they were mighty, but because they remembered who they were and held that memory like a song, unwavering. This too echoes CHIM, for CHIM is not escape. It is embrace of all stories, all selves, and the one behind them. To CHIM then, is to step into the hall of all possibilities and toast them each, without fear. The Nords, for all their blotness, live close to the tower. Their mountains touch the sky, their tongues shake the air, and their deaths echo in song. They do not seek truth. They carry it. They do not name CHIM. But when the wind howls, and the fire crackles low, and the mead runs silent, some among them feel it, that they are the dream, and the dreamer, and the silence between the two. In the shadow jungles of Valenwood, where the trees rise like thoughts unspoken, and the roots weave memory beneath moss and loam, the Bosmer live in rhythm with that which others cannot name. Their customs are strange to most, root-bound, blood-bound, myth-bound. But within the quiet turning of their rites, one finds traces of CHIM, not in sermons, but in sap, not in lore, but in story. The Green Pact, sworn between the Bosmer and Yefra, is not a restriction but a promise, to remain within the story that shapes the world. No tree may be harmed, no root may be cut. The forest gives, the forest takes, and in this sacred contract, the Bosmer remember what most forget, that the world is narrative, that to harm the tale is to risk unmaking the tell. The wild hunt, the most feared of their powers, is not a spell or a curse. It is an unraveling of form, a surrender to the primal beneath the shape. Those who invoke it become many, become more, become myth unbound, and in that transformation, one finds the shadow of CHIM, the dissolution of singular self into the possibility of all selves, and the return, if willed, to one center. The Bosmer do not speak of CHIM, but they know of the tale that continues because it chooses to. Their lives are told in song, and their gods are singers, shapers of order from chaos. Yefrey, the storyteller, gave form to the formless. He did not deny the chaos. He taught it to dance. In the Heartwood glades, far from cities and even tribal paths, some Bosmer shamans practice the rite of stillness. For 7 days, they do not move. They eat only wind, drink only shade. In that stillness, they listen, not with ears, but with memory. And those who return from the rite often speak strangely, not in riddles, but in revelations folded so gently into speech that one barely notices the echo. They say things like, "The leaf dreamed me first," or "The river has forgotten its source, but not its song." To be Bosmer is to be shaped by the world and to shape it in turn, without harm, without arrogance, with reverence for the tale that tells itself. And CHIM, at its core, is this same reverence, not mastery, not defiance, but harmony, to see the dream and dwell in it, with open eyes and soft footsteps. In a glade known only in myth, the eldest tree is said to grow, its trunk wide as a temple, its canopy touching the stars. Beneath it, according to heretical Bosmeri poems, lost in the cleansing wars of Falinesti, stands a doorway with no frame, a gap in the air where all stories become one, and those who step through do not leave. They become birds, or names, or melodies that drift on the wind and are never forgotten. Some believe this is CHIM made gentle, CHIM without need for knowing. The green, the wild will of the Valenwood, responds not to command, but to rhythm. Trees shift to hide cities, rivers forget their courses, and the Bosmer adapt. This too is a kind of CHIM, to flow with change, knowing one is both wave and water, to live without clinging to the shape of yesterday, but to carry its meaning into the next form. Among certain wandering lore-keepers, who tattoo their skin with maps that change by season, there is a tale of the dreaming deer. It is said that once in an age, a stag is born, who remembers all its past lives. It walks slowly, gently, always toward the same clearing. And when it lies down there, the trees lean inward, and the wind ceases, and the world dreams with it. Some say those who witness this moment glimpse the shape of CHIM in the stag's breath, an awareness that does not seek, but simply is. The Bosma teach their children, not through lecture, but through games, riddles, and story. One such tale speaks of a boy who wished to speak to the forest itself. He wandered deep, past all trails, and sat beneath a tree, older than time. For many days, he asked his questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the world? The tree said nothing. Until one morning, the boy awoke and realized the tree had always been answering through its stillness, its roots, its turning leaves. He wept, not from sorrow, but from understanding. This is CHIM, soft in shadow, the revelation that the dream has always been speaking, and we have always been listening. The world is not silent, it is sacred. And so, in Valenwood, CHIM does not burn, it does not thunder, it grows. It grows in the quiet, in the song, in the root that turns without severing. It grows in the eyes of the hunter who remembers the deer is part of him. It grows in the story that chooses to tell itself again. In the ashen wastes of Morrowind, where the land remembers fire more clearly than rain, the very earth breathes memory. The mountains bleed red, the wind carries silence that once was song, and the bones of old gods still echo through forgotten ruins. Among the Dunmer, CHIM is not merely known, it is embodied, not commonly, not openly, but deep within the folds of their mythic history. CHIM pulses like a hidden nerve beneath the skin of their faith. The Tribunal, Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek walked as gods among mortals, not because they claimed divinity, but because they bent their truths into the shape of belief. They touched the heart of Lorcan, the silent engine beneath Red Mountain, and remade themselves not as echoes of the divine, but as divine echoes made flesh. But only one among them understood the dream. Vavas, the warrior poet, the union of opposites. He alone among the three knew that godhood was not enough, that to shape the world, one must first see the dream and not wake. He wrote himself into being. He made his sermons masks. He wore his own contradictions like armor, and in doing so, he danced upon the edge of CHIM, not as master, but as lover. His 36 lessons are not teachings. They are mirrors, reflections folded upon reflections, filled with riddles, reversals, and sacred lies. To read them is not to learn, but to unlearn, until what remains is the sense of falling upward, of walking into the mouth of meaning without need for arrival. In them, CHIM is whispered in phrases that shimmer and vanish, like footsteps across still water. I am and are, all. This is not doctrine, it is declaration, the recognition that one is part of the dream, and the dream is not broken by that knowing. The Dunmer once called themselves Chima, the changed folk, golden-skinned and star-blooded. But when they followed the tribunal and turned from the Daedra, their skin darkened, their eyes burned, and they became the people of the dust. The transformation was not punishment. It was remembrance, a shift from glory to grit, from high towers to low temples. And in that transformation, CHIM became more than possibility. It became necessity. For the Dunmer, suffering is not shameful. It is sacred. Every ashfall, every loss, every betrayal becomes a part of the story. And CHIM, at its quietest, is this: to carry the weight without breaking, to bleed and still sing. In the ruins beneath Nshu Leftinth, in chambers no longer charted by map or tongue, there are murals etched in the oil-stained stone. They depict no gods, no kings, only a figure with two faces, one weeping, one smiling, standing beneath a burning tree. Some say these were Dwemer attempts to depict CHIM, misunderstood and abandoned. Others believe Vivek placed them there himself, as a joke for time to stumble over. And yet the image remains. The burning tree does not fall. The smiling face does not fade. It is contradiction preserved. Sata, Sil, ever silent, sought CHIM in calculation. He folded the world into machines and tried to simulate the dream until the dream responded. But CHIM cannot be simulated. It must be accepted. To know the self is fiction and still hold it gently. That is the difference. The clockwork city turned precise and hollow because CHIM cannot be caged in steel. Almalexia, radiant with memory, sought CHIM through control, through prayer enforced, beauty magnified, and love turned to reverence. But CHIM does not bloom in dominion. It grows only where the dream is not resisted. And so her light dimmed, even as her temples rose. Only Vibek laughed, and only Vibek remained. There is a statue in the Plaza of the Voice, in the heart of the city, once called Mournhold. It depicts Vivek, with one foot in water, one on stone, one arm held toward heaven, the other buried in earth. The face is unreadable, half smile, half silence. Pilgrims touch its base and whisper their questions, knowing no answer will come. And yet, they feel hurt, because CHIM does not answer. It listens. There is no path to CHIM that does not pass through self, no flame that does not first burn identity to ash. Vivek wrote this in water, sang it in silence, died and did not leave. He remains in myth, not as memory, but as motion. CHIM is not knowledge, it is poise, the balance between becoming and being. To say, I am fiction, and not vanish. To say, we are real, and not break. And so in Morrowind, CHIM still walks quietly, beneath ash and stone. In the pause between verses, in the stillness before the bell, in the breath before the word becomes world. Beyond the stars and between the spaces of what is and what was, the Orbis turns, not as wheel alone, but as whisper, ever circling. And within its arcane spirals, the concept of CHIM glows faintly, not as fire, but as ember, steady and unseen, unless one chooses to sit with it in silence. Among the earliest conceptions of the cosmos, the interplay of Anu and Podome birthed not just conflict, but contrast. Anu, the stasis of the eternal, and Podome, the motion of the ever-becoming. Together, their clash sang forth the tones of reality. From that tone came Etherius and Oblivion, light and shadow, intention and echo. And within that, Nirn, a contradiction, a possibility, was whispered into form. CHIM does not exist without this primal tension. It emerges not from one force or the other, but from their mirror. It is the balance struck between knowing and surrender, presence and withdrawal. It is not a god's gift, nor a mortal's rebellion, but the soul's remembering that it can dance and still be dust. The wheel, the sacred symbol that defines all creation, holds its meaning close. The 8 spokes of Mundus, turning around the hub of Zero, all ringed by the outer realms. Some say the wheel is a map, others say it is a prison. But those who approach CHIM know, as a mirror, they see their face in its turning, and they do not flinch. For to gaze into the wheel and know oneself as both center and circumference, both maker and made, is to reach towards CHIM. But to do so without arrogance, to see and remain, that is the narrow path. There are those among the ancient mystics of Somerset who speak of Sujich, endeavor, the sacred search not for knowledge, but for becoming. Their records are elusive, deliberately so, written in spirals, cloaked in metaphor, veiled by time. One such text, attributed to Rilmanar of Artaeum, reads, "To ascend, you must kneel. To become more, you must remember you are nothing. And from that nothing, the world will see." The Peugeots understood that CHIM could not be taken. It could only be entered. And entry required dissolution, not of form, but of certain. For the moment one believes CHIM is power, it vanishes. For the moment one clutches it, it slips. And for the one who smiles in the face of that vanishing, CHIM returns. In the invisible spaces of oblivion, where the Daedra craft realms from will alone, CHIM is a stranger, not because the Daedra cannot conceive of it, but because they reject the premise. They are not part of the dream. They stand apart. Watch. They are aware of the script, but do not act within it. They are audience, not character. And so CHIM eludes them, not from inability, but from choice. Yet some Daedric princes have brushed close to its edge. Hermaeus Mora, hoarder of secrets, has torn through the parchment of existence, seeking the phrase that holds the dream. But he cannot hold CHIM, for CHIM is not hidden, it is open, and Mora's hunger blinds him to that which does not flee. Baethia, the prince of plots, teaches rebellion and self-authorship. She has whispered CHIM into mortal ears, only to see them consumed by the fire of their own becoming. For CHIM does not abide pride, that forgets kinship. Even Azura, she of dawn and dusk, of knowing and unknowing, has spoken around CHIM, not to reveal, but to shape. She sees it in prophecy, but does not walk its path. For CHIM requires not foresight, but present. There is a tale, heretical and beautiful, of a mortal who wandered the edges of each Daedric realm, not to conquer or learn, but to listen. This soul, unnamed and unclaimed, asked nothing, took nothing, gave nothing, only mirrored, and in each prince they saw not horror or awe, but longing, and in the reflection of that longing, they glimpsed CHIM. Not in the gods, but in the spaces the gods refused to fill. The myth says they returned to Nirn, but never touched the ground again. They walk still, feet hovering just above the soil, neither ascended nor lost, only remaining. This is the shape of CHIM, not towering, but hovering, not loud, but echoing. To know CHIM is to stand at the heart of contradiction, and not resolve it. To know CHIM is to love the mask because it hides you. To know CHIM is to be the dreamer, smiling though the dream may weep, and in that smile, the wheel turns once more. Among the scattered fragments of lost Merithic scripts, written in inks, now faded to dust, there are glyphs that scholars cannot read, but only feel. Symbols that seem to change depending on who gazes at them. It is said some of these signs were carved by ancients, who understood CHIM, not as philosophy, but as breath. They did not teach it. They did not guard it. They lived it, like one lives a song without needing to sing. The Eyelids, the wild elves, are most often remembered for cruelty, for temples raised on the backs of slaves, for pacts with forgotten stars. But before their fall, before they turned toward light that blinded, they too danced with CHIM. In their earliest rites, long before the Alacian rebellion, they practiced the art of symbality, the weaving of sound and silence, to shape the truth of being. A lost discipline, said to be so precise that one misplaced tone could erase a memory from all who had shared it. These rituals were not performed in temples, but in glades beneath twin moons. Participants would hum the echo of a moment until that moment returned. In this they brushed the edge of CHIM, not through mastery, but through remembrance. To remember a moment so clearly that the world yields to it, that is CHIM, softly, fleetingly, as the breath between heartbeat. And yet, the Eyelids turned. Their wisdom frayed into hunger. Their love of light became a worship of power, and the songs that once remembered truth were rewritten into control. In their towers of white glass, they began to impose order, not reflect it. And so CHIM, like water poured into a mold, fled. Some say the fall of the Eyelids was not only political, but metaphysical, that their very perception of the dream hardened, became brittle, and when it cracked, so did their kingdoms. CHIM cannot abide rigidity. It dances with truth, but not possession. And when truth is owned, it disappears. From the ashes of Iliad, dominion rose the empire. First under Alessia, then under Remainan, and finally under Tiber Septim. Each age bore its own song, its own tower, its own approach to the dream. And each, in some hidden way, carried the echo of CHIM, either in pursuit, in loss, or in fear. Alessia, blessed by Akatosh, and beloved of Kynareth, carried the blood of man and the whisper of gods. Her rebellion was not merely against the Eyelids, but against a worldview that denied unity. Her compact with the eight divines, forming the Amulet of Kings, was an act of remembrance, that the mortal world must not forget the divine, and that divinity must not forget the dream. In this balance, CHIM waits, not in crowns or wars, but in the stillness of meaning. The amulet itself, a soul gem beyond all measure, did not grant power. It reminded each emperor who wore it touched a memory older than speech. Not a memory of conquest, but of consent. The ancient agreement between self and world, to keep dreaming, together. The empire of Remain, forged in dragonfire, carried a different resonance. Remain, it is said, was born of myth, not womb, found beneath the leaf fall of the Valus Mountains, already speaking, a child of starlight, of prophecy. Some believe he carried a shard of CHIM within him, not the knowing, but the rhythm. For he united not only nations but timelines, pulling old and future into one song. But it was Tiber Septim Talus who came closest to CHIM in imperial myth. His legend bends reality. His history folds upon itself, mortal and divine, human and God, one and many. These contradictions did not destroy him. They defined him. Tiber knew the dream. He saw its fragility. He wielded Numidium, the brass god, not as a tool of war, but as a question. And in the asking, worlds trembled. When he stepped beyond mortality, he did not shed his selfhood. He expanded it, so that Talos is not merely a name. It is a tone, a word within the word. And in that word, CHIM hums. Not because Tiber mastered the dream, but because he chose to remain within it, even after knowing its fiction. This is CHIM, the refusal to flee, the love of the unreal not as escape, but as devotion. CHIM does not crown emperors. It does not bow to kings. It passes through them, like wind through grass. Some bend with it, some break. There is an old myth, scarcely told now, of a figure who walks the halls of White Gold Tower at night, unseen, unfelt, a shadow who hums no song and casts no light. Some say it is Raymond. Others say it is Tiber. Still others say it is the dream itself, keeping watch. It never speaks. It only pauses at the windows looking outward, as though watching the world dream itself again. And in that gaze, CHIM remains. Beneath the towers, beyond the tomes, and beneath even the silence of recorded myth, there lies a space where CHIM breathes without form. A place not marked by map, nor bound by kingdom. It is found in the folds of forgotten dreams, and in the still eyes of those who no longer see. It is not hidden by difficulty, but by simplicity. For CHIM is not a prize, it is a present, and those who carry it walk without echo. Among the mystics of Artium, the island of shifting time and softened memory, CHIM is not a word uttered. It is a rhythm observed in the tides, a truth glimpsed in the reflection of the self, dissolved gently across many lifetimes. The Pisidic monks do not pursue CHIM, they tune themselves to it, like string to tone, like breath to chant. There is a chamber in the Sappara Tower, known simply as the Unfolding. It has no door, and no ceiling. Those permitted to enter do not find walls, but horizon, not silence, but song. And within it, there is no teaching, only remembering. The soul is invited to remember what it never forgot, that it is story, and dream, and eye, and mirror. CHIM does not greet the student. It waits for the one who no longer calls themselves student. And so within the endeavor of the Pisidics, an effort that is not ascent, but centering, the self becomes soft, the world becomes intimate. Time is no longer a chain, but a current, and to those who feel CHIM in this way, the dream does not unravel, it opens. The ancient texts preserved in sun-sealed vaults speak of Anahis, a mystic who claimed to have lived inside the hinge of a thought. His scrolls are written in ink that only appears in moonlight, and even then only when the reader has fasted. He writes, "I knew the dream, and I wept, not because it wasn't real, but because it was never meant to be anything else. I remain not to defy, but to adore." These are not the declarations of kings, nor the boasts of sages. They are soft prayers, left beneath stones in places where wind speaks clearly. The Pisidics believe CHIM is not an endpoint, but a beginning remembered, a soft return to the first breath, before thought hardened into self. And so they train not in the violent mastery of will, but in the gentle unwinding of illusion. They walk backward into presence, they speak forward into silence. But beyond Artium, CHIM lingers even where silence is not known. In the dreams of mortals who never read the scrolls. In the laughter of children who do not know the world is false, and love it anyway. In the smile of an old potter whose hands shape truth in clay, never seeking to last. CHIM is not reserved for the mighty. It is not locked behind thrones. It is in the way the morning light touches dust. In the knowing glance between friends who never needed words. In the hush before music begins, and the hush after it ends. In this way, CHIM is the thread that binds not by force, but by softness. The Dwemer failed not because they reached too far, but because they reached too hard. They tried to solve the dream, to pin it down, to equal it. But the dream is not an equation. It is a song. One must not balance it, but join. In their effort to remove the self from the lie, they unmade the self entirely. CHIM is the opposite. It is to see the lie and choose it. To know it is a dream and still love its color, its shape, its sorrow. There are few who speak of CHIM now. Fewer still who understand it, and yet there are those who live it unknowingly. The old fisherman who casts his net into empty tide, not to catch, but to feel the weight of waiting. The wandering bard who plays for no one, because the notes need to be sung. The gardener who plants for a season they will never see. These are the dreamers who do not awaken, and in their quiet devotion, the world continues. CHIM is not victory, it is not escape, it is not flame, it is the soft choice, to remain, to walk the shore of the unreal with bare feet and open hands, to hold the mask with kindness, to be fiction, knowingly, and smile. There is a place between places, not mapped, not named, but known to those who forget their names at dusk and remember other ones at dawn. In the old texts, it is hinted at, not in bold declarations, but in the spaces between words, in the margin notes of mad monks, in the footnotes of forgotten sermons. This place is not physical, yet neither is it void. It is the moment before the dream begins, to dream itself again. And within this moment, CHIM waits not as answer, but as atmosphere. The mystics of Artaeum speak of it only in breath. The Dunmer call it by no name at all, but in the tongues of the earliest tribes, it was once whispered as Sihare, meaning the second silence. The first silence is the one before birth. The second, the one found after knowing. And it is in that second silence that CHIM hums, softly, like ash settling on a sacred floor. CHIM is not found in movement, but in stillness. And yet, it is not absence. It is presence so complete it need not announce itself. It exists not to be perceived, but to be allowed. Like wind through reed, it speaks only when nothing else is speaking. The earliest Veluthi texts, fragments burned and buried in the exodus across the land, speak of a priestess who heard the truth of the dream, not through vision, but through forgetting. She forgot her lineage, her teachings, her name, and then her own forgetting. And in that last hollowing, she saw the whole of the wheel turning, not as prison, but as poem. She did not write her revelations down. She simply sat, and those who passed her felt calmer. In this we begin to see that CHIM is not always dramatic, not always crowned in fire and contradiction. Sometimes it is nothing more than being with the world, and no longer pulling away. To walk, not toward destiny, but within it. To speak, not to change, but to echo. The stars, those watchers of the turning dream, have long been tied to fate, prophecy, the pull of Magaka, and myth. But some among the oldest stargazers claimed the constellations were not signs but memories, that when one truly looked at the stars, they were not predicting anything, they were remembering something we had forgotten to remember. One stargazer, known only as Pale Mouth, wrote, "CHIM is the name we once had before we became people. Before the I and the U forgot they were never different." This fragment, scratched onto a piece of cave wall in ink, made from crushed starlight fungus, was never finished. The rest had faded, or was never written. As if the thought itself could not bear to be whole. CHIM refuses to be completed. It is not an equation to solve. It is a song without a final note. A sentence that leaves the last word to the wind. In some mythologies, CHIM is likened to standing upon a shoreline of infinite selves, each a wave. The fool tries to catch them, the tyrant tries to stop them, but the dreamer simply stands, letting each wave pass through, and remains unchanged. This remaining is not stubbornness, it is reverence. Even the towers, those ancient spires that root existence into pattern, each carry within them a shadow of CHIM, not because they teach it, but because they reflect. To ascend a tower is not to gain power, it is to lose all but the essential name, and then to realize the name was never yours to keep, that the tower does not lift you, it lowers the world, until you and the dream are equal. That is CHIM. There is an Elder Scroll, unreadable to most, burned into blindness for many, whose outer margin holds a looping pattern of ink, meaningless to all translation. And yet, when placed before certain dreamers, the ink begins its hum, not in sound, but in shape. The viewer does not learn anything, they do not awaken. They simply feel that something has always been waiting inside them to stop searching. Some have called it the smile of CHIM, others call it the final mask, but the name is dust. The meaning is breath. CHIM does not demand sacrifice. It invites stillness. It does not scream, it listens. And if you are very quiet, if your thoughts soften and your name forgets its sharpness, you may feel it, not as revelation, but as return. The wheel turns, and you do not fall off. Among the ruins of Craglon, where the stars once walked and the ground still hums with ancient memory, lie stones carved not by hand but by intention. They are smooth, seamless, untouched by tool. Upon their surfaces are no words, no symbols, only patterns of presence. They are not meant to be read, but felt, and those who sit with them long enough report a strange sensation. The sense that the world has momentarily stopped pretending. That moment, unrecorded, is CHIM, not as thunder, not as but as the soft uncoiling of a forgotten name, whispered by no tongue. There exists a forgotten sect of Nadis, ancient people of the north, who believed CHIM was not something to attain, but something to be unlearned back into. Their rituals did not ascend toward revelation, but descended into stillness. They practiced unbecoming, a discipline of letting go, of memory, of form, of desire. And in the silence left behind, they claim to feel the gentle hand of the dream resting on the brow of the self. Little remains of their teachings, save a fragment etched into the inner wall of a burial cairn. To become the story, one must leave the stage. To remain, one must never leave. It is not contradiction, it is invitation. CHIM does not demand you stop being. It invites you to stop needing to be real. In the dusty scrolls of the cult of the ancestor moth, whose members spend lifetimes reading the elder scrolls in silence until blindness gifts them vision, there are records encoded in scent and folded parchment, describing a state of being wherein time flows inward, a folding rather than a line. In that fold, they say, is a presence that does not speak, but sings only if you have no ears. This presence is CHIM. To the ancestor moths, it is known not by name, but by gesture. A raised hand that never rises, a glance that sees even with closed eyes. For CHIM is not sensation. It is the one who notices the sensation and does not hold it. The Red Guards of Yakuda, before their exodus, told of a warrior poet named Anzadal, who once faced a dragon, not with blade, but with silence. The dragon roared, but Anzadal only bowed. The dragon burned, but Anzadal did not flee. At last the dragon asked, "Why do you not fight or fall?" And Anzadal replied, "Because I was never standing." The dragon vanished. Some say this was CHIM, others say it was only poetry, but perhaps the difference was never meant to matter. The oldest desert texts of Hammerfell speak of the walk at dusk, a ritual where one walks from oasis to ruin, blindfolded, barefoot, and unguarded. The goal is not destination, but disintegration of the idea of distance. In this, they say, the soul begins to forget its shape and becomes the horizon. And once the soul becomes horizon, it does not end. This too is not victory, not escape, not revelation, but remaining without reason, without need, without fear. There are no temples built for CHIM, no banners flown, no battles waged in its name. For CHIM is not a god, it is not a throne. It is the quiet refusal to leave the story, even after you know it is only a story. It is the last line of a forgotten poem, written in a language no longer spoken, which you remember without understanding. It is the moment a dreamer realizes they are dreaming and chooses to dream still, with love. Many have sought it, fewer have seen it. Almost none have stood within it without vanishing, for the dream will test you, not with fire, but with silence, not with pain, but with echo. And CHIM, gently, will ask, will you vanish when you are seen? Will you sing when you are unmade? Will you smile even when the self fades into fiction? To those who answer yes, the world remains, not because it must, but because it was loved. There is a tale, old and seldom told, of a wandering monk from the West who carried no scroll, wore no colours, and bore no name. Those who met him described the strange stillness that followed in his wake. Birds paused in flight, winds ceased to stir, and conversations softened as he passed. When asked who he was, he simply smiled and said, "I have no self but the one you see." Some said he was mad, others said he was CHIM walking. He left no teachings, he carved no tablets. But those who listened long enough claimed they remembered things they never knew, that their dreams grew quieter, that they no longer felt the need to arrive. This is the nature of CHIM. It does not inform, it unburdens. In the archives of Cloud Rest, buried beneath layers of Altmary commentary and debate, there is a single note, unsigned and untranslated, written in ink, that fades unless viewed by candlelight. It says only this: "When I understood that I was not, I remained." It is not a contradiction, it is a completion. For CHIM does not destroy the self. It shows the self its paper walls and waits. It does not tear them down. It invites a breath, a step, a soft unfold. The wheel continues to turn, not because it must, but because someone still wishes to turn it. CHIM is not found in purpose. It is found in poise. The Aedra, the spirits who gave themselves to the making of the world, embody sacrifice. They lost their wholeness to give Nirn its shape. They are the bones of the world, the breath in the leaves, the blood beneath mountains. They do not move. They remain. The Daedra, who kept themselves intact, walk freely through oblivion. They change, they rage, they shape, they test. But CHIM is neither giving nor keeping. It is the knowledge that the giving and the keeping are both imagined, and yet the choice still matters. To see both the truth and the fiction, and to act with love. There are texts within the hidden libraries of Alinor that attempt to trace the lineage of CHIM through divine figures. Lorcan, they say, first glimpsed it in his rebellion. Not because he lied, but because he knew the lie and still offered it. He proposed the world, not as trap, but as gift. Not as delusion, but as experience. He was torn for this, yet his heart still beats beneath Red Mountain, a reminder that even the broken dream may still echo. Some say CHIM is Lorcan's gift, scattered like ash across the ages. Others say it is the price of remembering what the gods forgot. But the truth is simpler still. CHIM is the name for what remains when nothing needs to. The stars remember it. The wind whispers it. And within each soul is a silence, shaped exactly like it. In rare texts attributed to the vanished order of the Fifth Veil, there is mention of a ritual called the Unsevering. It was not ceremony nor spell, only a single question spoken in the dream before waking. If you knew none of this was real, would you still love it? And those who answered yes did not awaken in the usual way. They did not open their eyes, they simply remained. For love is the secret tower. CHIM is not a gate, it is a turning, not a triumph, but a tenderness. To walk in CHIM is not to walk above others, but beside them, knowing the story is false, and walking it anyway, because someone must carry the lantern, even in fiction. To remain is not to cling, but to care, and in that caring, the world does not shatter. It softens, it continues, it dreams, and the dreamer smiles, knowing what they are, and choosing, gently, to remain. There are ruins in the eastern ashlands of Morrowind, where no maps guide, and no wind dares to linger. They do not rise like towers, nor fall like tombs. They simply are worn stones, laid by hands long vanished, in patterns that mean nothing to the eye, but everything to the earth. The Dhamma speak of these places in quiet tones, as if remembering dreams that never fully ended. They say if one sleeps near them, they may awaken to find the moon hanging lower, and time unfolding sideways. These are places where CHIM once passed, not like fire or light, but like breath over still water. There are no markings, no altars, nothing is claimed, and yet presence remains. CHIM never arrives loudly. In the lore of the temple, beneath layers of politics and prophecy, there exists a passage sealed by silence alone. Only 3 words remain, scratched on the inside of a forgotten mask. The witness stays, to witness the world as fiction, and still walk within it, unshaken and unburnt, is to embody CHIM, not by force, not by enlightenment, but by stillness, by being the witness who does not need to. Mythic, poet god of the tribunal, touched CHIM. That much is known, not by conquest, but by absorption. He did not ascend through denial, but through embrace. His sermons spiral, not to confuse but to mirror the movement of thought when it stops fearing paradox. His words are both blade and balm, and within them CHIM flickers, not as answer, but as a divisive writes. I became the word. I became the wheel. I did not escape the dream. I loved it. That is CHIM, the decision to dwell inside the myth, knowing it is myth, and choosing it regardless. And so Vivek danced. Not to escape gravity, but to sing beside it. He became part fiction, part faith, half visible to mortals and half remembered by stars. Not because he sought to own CHIM, but because he understood that CHIM cannot be possessed. It can only be walked. CHIM is the step taken after seeing the edges of everything and choosing not to fall. The mystics of the north speak of the place where the sky remembers itself, a field of soft rock and starlight, where nothing grows and yet nothing dies. It is said that those who sleep there dream not of futures, but of alternate nows, of choices never made and yet still remembered. In one such dream, a forgotten king stood atop a tower that did not exist. He saw the world burning below, not in pain, but in song. Each flame, a voice, each ruin, a note. And the king, knowing he was not real, still chose to bow his head and weep, because the song was beautiful. CHIM does not protect from sorrow, it deepens it, but in that depth is kindness. The world does not need to be real to be worthy of care. There is an old saying passed down by the nomads of elsewhere, spoken only beneath full moons. The wise cat does not chase the moon, it walks where its light falls. This is CHIM, not chasing, not grasping, only walking. To walk in CHIM is to let the world pass through you without needing to name it. It is to smile at illusion, not because it deceives, but because it dared to try. Even the Elder Scrolls, timeless and unknowable, bend subtly around CHIM. The seers who read them speak of passages that once seemed fixed, suddenly drifting. A word becomes another. A moment reverses, not broken, not lost, but remembered differently. For CHIM does not alter time, it alters relation. The self becomes spacious, and the story breathes. There are no masters of CHIM, only those who stop needing to be, and in that release, the wheel continues, softly, willingly, lovingly, because someone remains, not to rule, not to rise, but simply to be, even after knowing what being truly is. There is a cavern beneath the roots of the adamantine tower, older than stone, older even than concept. It is not charted, it is not seen, but those who have wandered far enough into themselves have spoken of it, not as a place of depth, but of pause, a chamber in which the world forgets how to echo, and silence does not end, but listens. They say within this unlit hollow, the air itself remembers CHIM, not by name, not by sound, but by presence. There is a phrase in the language of the deep elves, now unraidable by tongue and unspoken by memory, that once referred to this stillness, not truth, not dream, but something closer to alignment without effort. The concept is not translatable, not because the words are lost, but because the mind must soften to feel it. It cannot be explained, it can only be joined. This is the posture of CHIM, to align with the unreal, not to correct it, but to rest within it. It is here, beneath all towers, beneath all meaning, that CHIM begins not as revelation, but as gentleness. In the final known fragments of the mythic orbis, torn from inkless vellum in the final hours of the Alacean order, it is written, "He who remains after knowing the wheel is false, becomes not the axle, nor the hub, but the turning itself, not the center, not the structure, the motion. That motion is CHIM, not progress, not pursuit, but willful being. Not despite illusion, but because of it." Some among the Ashlander wise walkers speak of the silent path, a tradition where one walks a spiral carved into the desert floor, each step taken while reciting one's life backwards from death to birth. At the spiral's center is no idol, no relic, only a bowl of sand, left untouched. To complete the walk and not disturb the bowl is considered a sign that one has brushed the edge of CHIM, not through mastery, not through endurance, but through grace. For CHIM is never an act of will, it is an act of love. Even those strange and ancient trees of Argonia are said to hum differently in the presence of CHIM. Their songs shift from root memory to dream harmony. Argonians who bathe in this resonance speak of becoming soft in time, as if their breath and body are remembered by the world before they move. This too is CHIM, to be so deeply accepted by the dream that movement becomes a form of listening. There are countless attempts to define CHIM. Scholars, madmen, mystics and monarchs have all written volumes. Some call it power, others call it delusion, mastered, still others name it the refusal to awaken. But none of these are quite whole, because CHIM is not about grasping, it is about yielding, to remain in the dream after knowing it. It is dream, is not resistance, it is reverence. Mythic knew this. Lorca knew this. Perhaps even Telos, in the final folding of his breath, knew this. And in knowing, they did not seek to escape. They did not call the world false and flee its light. They bowed and stayed, to witness, to sing, to smile at the mask, and love the face behind it. Even when that face is no longer real, in the highest chambers of the Elder Scrolls, where only those who have forgotten how to desire may read without burning. It is said the last line of the last unwritten scroll is not a prophecy, it is a question, and the question is not asked in words. It is asked in silence, in pause, in the sacred breath between one thought and the next. And those who feel that silence, who hear not what it says but what it holds, know they have reached the edge of CHIM, not to possess, but to release. And so the world turns, still dreamed, still loved, because someone somewhere remains. In the far north of Skyrim, where the winds speak in tongues, older than dragons, and the snow carries memory deeper than stone, there is said to be a single cairn that no one built. It sits not atop a hill, nor within a vale, but between both, at the place where boundary forgets itself. Those who find it do not recall how they arrived. They only remember the stillness. And in that stillness, some say, the world sighs. This is not as philosophy, but as moments soft, whole, and unspoken. It is in such places unmapped, unclaimed, that CHIM breathes most clearly, for it does not arrive where it is sought, and it never dwells in noise. It lingers where desire has emptied, and where presence holds no shape. Among the Nords there is a rarely spoken tale of Ysmir the Unknown, who vanished from his own name after staring too long into the flame of a hearth where no wood burned. He was seen days later, walking barefoot across ice that did not crack. When asked what he had seen, he said nothing, but his eyes never closed again. And it is said that in his gaze, each soul saw themselves as both infant and act. Some believe he had touched CHIM, not with words, not with mind, but with absence. For CHIM is not something taken in. It is something gently uncovered, like a scroll beneath dust, or a face beneath a mask worn too long. Even the stars, long symbols of fate and pattern, bow slightly around those who walk with CHIM, not visibly, not even to Magia's gaze, but subtly, as if their arrangement forgets its purpose for a moment, just long enough for beauty to become breath. There is a story passed in fragments among the reach folk of the Drodark, a child born without shadow, who grew without aging, and who left no footprints. When the tribe asked the shamans what curse this might be, the eldest among them wept and said, "No curse, only remembrance." CHIM is not absence of self. It is not the denial of form. It is the form held lightly like a name sung once at birth, and never needed again. In the hidden corners of the school of Julianos, beyond scroll and statue, scholars debate a paradox never written in any tome. If the self knows it is false, and remains, is it not more true than those who never asked? There is no answer. But in the long silence after the question fades, some feel peace. This is CHIM, not knowledge, but the rest that follows knowledge, like dust settling after a storm of meaning, like light in a room after the fire has burned out. CHIM walks beside sorrow and never tries to end it. It does not fix the world, It does not rise above it. It dwells. It cares. And in its caring, the illusion is no longer prison, but poetry. The wheel turns. This truth remains. But those who walk CHIM do not resist the turning. They do not try to stop the spokes. They place their hand upon the rim and move with it, freely, joyfully, knowing all is dream and still loving every breath of it. This is not freedom of escape. It is freedom of return. To be fiction knowingly is not madness. It is mercy. To stay after knowing is not weakness. It is grace. There is a scroll within the vaults of the Temple of the One, sealed behind 3 names, never spoken, which contains only a single glyph. It translates, roughly, to and. No beginning, no end. Just continuation. This too is CHIM. It does not end. It does not conclude. It moves quietly wherever someone chooses not to leave. Not to rule, not to rise. Only to remain, gently, within the dream they now understand. There is a song said to be sung only once in the age of a world, and never with voice. It is not written, not composed, but lived, in moments of pure presence, where nothing is added and nothing is taken. This song, the physics say, is the dreaming within the dream, and its name has never been spoken aloud. But in the spaces between memory and forgetting, this song hums softly through all things. It is here, in the unseen intervals, that CHIM rests, not as secret, not as prize, but as patience. There is a ruin in southern Valenwood, overtaken by root and moss, where no sound echoes, not because it is cursed, but because it remembers stillness more deeply than stone. The Bosmer do not approach it. They leave fruit nearby, not as offering, but as witness. They say the ruin belongs to the one who stayed. No name, no shrine, only that title, the one who stayed. CHIM does not exalt those who find it. It softens them. It does not make gods. It unburdens selves. In the dreams of the oracles of Azura, there is often a figure that walks backwards through time, gently brushing starlight from their shoulders. They do not speak. They do not gesture, but their presence carries the weight of every ending ever known. When asked who it is, the oracles answer simply, that is the one who chose to remain, not the one who escaped, not the one who won, only the one who remained. Even Azura, mistress of twilight, does not name CHIM. She recognizes it. Her silence deepens in its presence, and her stars blink more slowly, because CHIM does not challenge her, it joins her. And this is perhaps the great mystery. CHIM is not resistance. It is not defiance. It is accompaniment. To exist with the false, not as victim, but as companion. To walk alongside the song, not to change the melody, but to hold its final note a little longer. The Dwemer failed not because they reached too far, but because they forgot to feel. In their desire to master the dream, they burned the soul that might have embraced it. They erased themselves with precision, but not with love. CHIM is the opposite of erasure. It is memory without binding, form without permanence, self without gravity. There are accounts from the oldest Reach clans, those that never bowed to name or line, of a rite called the Hollowing, in which the elders walk into the fog of early morning and forget their place. When they return, if they return, they say nothing of what was seen, but their hands tremble more softly. Their voices no longer fear silence. They are said to have touched CHIM, not as power, but as release. Even in the towers of Somerset, where clarity is prized above all, CHIM is not denied. It is studied as a kind of sacred uncertainty, a state in which all truths can be known, and none must be clung to. In the crystal-like lore, the reflection of CHIM is said to fracture, not the mirror, but the viewer's need for reflection. It does not break. It quiets. To know CHIM is to know that even when the story ends, it still matters. That love in a dream is no less love. That sorrow in a fiction still deepens the soul. That staying even after seeing the lie is an act of unmeasured grace. There is no doctrine for CHIM, no altar, no law. Only this: remain, not for power, not for glory, but because you are never apart from the song to begin with. The wheel turns, and the one who walks its rim does not seek to stop it, nor to fall from it. They walk, lightly, lovingly, endlessly. In the far edges of the Arbis, where even the stars fall silent, There is said to be a place without horizon. No shape defines it, no time encloses it. It is not oblivion, nor ethereous, nor mundus. It is simply the in-between that remains after all destinations are forgotten. The Pgics call it the pale memory. The Hist refuse to name it at all, but in some forgotten sermons, it is referred to only as the quiet that remembers you. There is no path to it. Only those who stop walking arrive. This is CHIM, not as arrival, not as culmination, but as the stillness at the center of all spiraling truths. To reach it is not to attain, but to release. In the final meditation chambers beneath Artaeum, there are walls carved with no words, only contours of thought left behind by those who pass through without need for language. The walls hum when touched, softly, like a voice too patient for sound, and to sit in that space is to forget all that separates seer from seen. The self ceases to seek. The seeking ceases to self. There is no doctrine to explain this, only silence. And in that silence, CHIM stands, not with raised hand but with open palm. To walk in CHIM is to accept fiction so fully that it no longer threatens. The lie no longer wounds, because one no longer hides from it. It is the knowledge that the world is dream, and the choice to dream it still. It is not transcendence. It is tenderness. The tower does not lift the soul upward. It lowers the world until the soul and the dream stand together, eye to eye, hand to hand, breath to breath. Even Lorcan, torn and scattered, remains within CHIM. His heart may beat in stone, but his will lingers in pause. He did not impose the dream. He offered it, knowing full well that it would be misunderstood, that it would bring sorrow, suffering, splintering. He smiled anyway, because he believed in the dreamer's ability to love even a broken story. This is the secret of CHIM. It does not fix the broken. It cherishes it. It is the soul sitting beside a ruin and refusing to rebuild, not out of despair, but reverence. Because the ruin speaks too, and its silence is sacred. There is an elder scroll, never unrolled, sealed with wax that never melts. Within it, it is said, is a single moment, not an event, not a prophecy, but a stillness so deep it became memory. Those who have stood near it report nothing, no visions, no thoughts, only tears, not of sorrow, of recognition. They saw the dream, and they stayed, not because it was real, because it was theirs. In ancient Yokudan tales, a nameless sword saint once walked into the ocean, saying only, "If the wave knows me, I am not lost." He did not return, but the waves after that were said to break, more gentle. Even the sea remembers CHIM, because CHIM is not imprint, it is resonance. It does not change the world by force, it softens it by love. And so the dream turns endlessly, rhythmically, with no promise and no end. And those who walk in CHIM do not try to halt its motion. They do not seek to rewrite the script. They simply take their place in the story they know is not real and love it still. Because love, even in illusion, remains holy. And presence, even in fiction, remains whole. The night folds gently over the world, as if the sky itself is a breath held long enough to remember silence. Time here is a slow pulse, not measured but felt, as soft and inevitable as ash settling after fire, as dust gathering in a forgotten corner, where light barely lingers. This is the place where the story of CHIM ends, not with a bang, but with a hush, a fading exhale, that leaves behind nothing but the echo of Amet once known and never fully grasped. CHIM is a memory without origin, a flame without source, a breath that neither begins nor ceases. It is the quiet between two heartbeats, the space where the soul recognizes itself, without name or face. It is not a thing to be found, nor a truth to be claimed, but a presence to be allowed, like the lingering warmth of a dream after waking, fragile and intangible, yet indelible. There are no final words, no closing verses. The Elder Scrolls themselves hold only fragments, glimpses caught in their shifting script, never a whole. For CHIM is not a conclusion, but an invitation to remain within the turning dream, not as a prisoner, nor a master, but as a lover who knows the illusion and chooses to embrace it still. The voices that once sought to define it fall silent. The scholars and prophets fade into shadow. What remains is the quiet rhythm of being itself, a stillness that neither answers nor asks, but simply is. And in that stillness, the dreamer smiles, a smile not born of certainty, but of surrender. The mask slips away, not with violence, but with gentle acceptance. The soul is neither lost nor found, but simply free. The wheel turns on, the dream continues, and somewhere in the delicate pause between thought and forgetting, CHIM breathes softly, a flame without smoke, a light without heat, a song without words, not ending, not beginning, but eternal.